Welcome to the Celtic Way Morning Briefing Live. I'm Tony Haggerty, and today I'm joined by Sean Martin and Alison McConnell. How you doing, guys? All right?
Decent.
You're better than me, I'll tell you that. I think that's fair to say. Well, guys, from the highs of Hampden to the dropping of priceless points in Paisley, it's the way it is with Celtic under Ange. Sean, you covered it last night for the Celtic Way. First and foremost, what's your overriding thoughts and emotions after that?
Overriding thoughts is it was almost a carbon copy of a couple of times this season that Celtic have dropped points in an inability to break down a stubborn, and I must give them praise for it considering the makeshift nature of their team, a stubborn St Mirren team. Ultimately, I still think that is on Celtic. I don't think it's as much as I just praise St Mirren. I think ultimately it does come down to Celtic's inability to break through the lines. They had a couple of chances. Ange Postecoglou mentioned that after the game, but I don't think the chances were even that clear cut a lot of the time. Over 30 shots, but I still don't think the actual chances created were of any great significance. That said, Celtic, I'm sure we'll come to it, had their own selection. I wouldn't say dilemmas because I'm still not sure how many were forced on them, but certainly there was selection changes in the team. But no, overall, it's now 6 points of a difference at the top, and that's a halfway stage. It is not the end of the world, despite what it might feel like. It's still touching distance. It's almost a psychological thing, a mental thing, because it is still 2 games, which it was with 4 points as well. But it is now 6 points, which makes it seem so much worse than what it actually, I would argue, is. It's still touching distance.
Alison, how crucial could last night be come the final reckoning come May?
I think you'll only know. I think you'll only know how wounding a result it is as the season goes deeper. What it does do is put Celtic under more pressure at best, psychologically and every other aspect of it, because they were already walking a very tight line, I think, and it brings that into question now. It means that the pressure is all on Celtic, particularly for the games against Rangers. Now, where you would have to say that game on the 2nd of February with the revised winter schedule now takes on enormous significance. And I think it was always going to be a significant encounter, but I think now that almost flips the season one way or another, depending on the outcome of that. I think if Celtic had to win, and you're assuming that they win in Boxing Day up against St Johnstone, and then they win their games going into that one, but if the gap was still 6 points going into the second game against Rangers of the season, if Celtic were to win it, all of a sudden it reframes the season. If you're to lose it, it suddenly becomes very, very difficult to get yourself back into it. So I think the pressure now is on Celtic. I think it gives Rangers a bit of stability and a bit of leeway. It gives them a really strong cushion, and it's up to Celtic now to try and eat into it.
Sean, you touched upon it at the start. Some changes and made to the lineup. Lots of Celtic supporters up in arms. No Kyogo, all that kind of stuff. And changes maybe were enforced on them, but lots of conflicting, different opinions. Did he get the team selection wrong? Did Ange get it wrong, or was that the hand he was dealt?
Well, the thing is, right, see, when you look at the match day squad, I realise there's the Kyogo debate as well because he wasn't in the squad at all. But when you look at the match day squad, which you've got to take on the face of it, that is who was available to him, then I would argue that potentially Juranovic maybe, but then could you really drop Ralston at right back? Probably not. And then Taylor over Scales is the only way to make that stronger from the bench that was there, which just feeds into the fact that what I says in my match ratings was that when you're putting Liam Shaw on with 10 minutes left when you're chasing a goal, it probably is a damning indictment of the game-changing options or lack thereof that you've got on the bench. So I do see the point, and I would like to know if Kyogo couldn't even have played maybe 20 minutes to manage his return, because the lack of game-changing options and attack-minded game-changing options on the bench was just as responsible for the way that Celtic saw the game out rather than the team selection from the start. But when you look at the matchday squad as a whole, there is only maybe Taylor in for Scales, who I don't think had a bad game either, but Taylor in for Scales and maybe Juranovic somewhere in the team, maybe right wing again, is the only changes from the bench that you could have made from the matchday squad that started.
Alison, a lot of Celtic supporters also look at it and think that the size of the rebuild, the lack of depth in squad that we've been banged about since July, you've won the first trophy of the season and you are only 6 points behind. It's still that 2-game swing that we've been talking about anyway. So it's on the flip side of that, the outlook's not that bleak, is it?
Well, I think what you would say first and foremost is Celtic prefer that the shoe was on the other foot. I think
Yeah,
6 points makes every game very precarious because you know that you can't afford to drop anything else. So I think it does invite pressure onto you. I think it does draw that. I do think the squad, I think when you look at the numbers, the squad looks as though there is depth in it. But I think when you look at the quality, I don't think there is like for like. I think there's a danger that Celtic have become over-reliant on Kyogo. I think there's an element of maybe looking too much to him in games, and I think when he's taken out the team, there's a real danger of where do the goals come from. Now, I would qualify that by saying the injuries to that front three have also made the hand all the harder to cope with. Following, Jota's out, James Forrest have been out. These are guys that are known for their creativity, for assists, for goals, for being able to open up and unlock defences. But what you're seeing with these guys out of the team is that there's a staidness about Celtic when it comes to that. And I thought the game was actually very, very reminiscent of the Livingston game last night. I thought just that element of playing around the box or playing around St Mirren's box, but not really having any significant penetration at times. And you could sense the frustration, even around the hour mark. I thought you could sense the frustration and the sense of the minutes ticking by without anything changing significantly. I think it does point to a January transfer window. I think there are key players and key areas where Celtic now need to go and invest. And I think they have the nucleus and the spine of a decent squad. I think it is a strong squad when everyone is fit and available. But right now, what you're seeing is a team who can't cope when key players are out of the team.
Sean, what's going to change on Sunday? Because St Johnstone will play the exact same way, won't they?
Aye, I think they will. Whether they do it as effectively as St Mirren did last night, I don't know. But it's as much about Celtic as I say, it's as much about Celtic as what the opposition do. Celtic, especially without Kyogo there, I know that he's not exactly a target man, but even the low crosses that, for instance, Ralston actually seemed to be the only one perceptible enough to actually start putting in rather than floating them into Leila Bada, which baffled me. Even with the low crosses, an early goal makes a difference, and then you don't necessarily resort to playing in front of them, or if you do, then it's to Celtic's benefit anyway. So again, it comes down to Celtic as much as it comes down to the way the opposition play. More risky passes would be a start. I thought, I'm sure we'll come on to Mikey Johnston, but I do think he's been held up as more of a whipping boy than he needs to be for last night. I think he was one of the only ones trying to make things happen. His decision-making was poor, I'm not going to deny that. But I think there's more senior players in the team last night that did not step up any more than Mikey Johnston.
Alison, we spoke off air just prior to you coming on and you said Mikey Johnston was frustrating the life out of you. I think a lot of Celtic supporters will feel like that about last night in terms of that Mikey, whenever he gets his chance, just, I don't know, what's he had, 17 appearances this season, 0 goals, 1 assist. I think that's his stats. You're looking for a bit more than that, are you not?
Yeah, and I think it would have been a different game. I thought he started well. I think, he cut inside from the left. I think 8 minutes or so, beat a couple of players. He had that shot that was saved or parried. And I think it's maybe a different game if that goes in. I thought he started well. I thought he looked hungry. I thought he looked capable, but I thought he got dragged into the way that Celtic were playing. And I kind of agree with Sean. I think there are players of greater seniority whom you would have expected a bit more of last night, given the kind of game it was. But I think what was happening was the quality of the final ball into the box wasn't good enough time and time again. And like Sean, I thought this repeated onus in getting a high ball in, it quite clearly wasn't offering any kind of success. I thought Joe Shaughnessy was excellent last night. I'd say that for St Mirren. I thought he threw himself and blocked everything. I thought he had an outstanding game, but when you're playing with a diminutive front line and you're playing without a recognised centre forward, I think the key was to get the ball low and hard across the face of the goal. And the few times he'd done that in the latter stages was a time that they troubled St Mirren or put them under a wee bit of pressure.
Why did we do that, Sean? Pumping high crosses into a box which St Mirren were easily cope with and were comfortable with, without a recognised striker. If you're playing without a recognised striker, then you have to mix it up. You have to do something a bit different. And if you're going to go high, then why wasn't someone like Carter Vickers moved forward for the last 10 minutes?
I think they were hoping for the Ross County effect there. I think they were hoping that it would come off in the end if they kept doing it. I don't think it was threatening enough during the game. And as I say, the only one that I saw really recognising that it's not going to be a clipped in high ball that's really going to cause havoc here was Anthony Ralston. On his overlaps, it was him that was trying to power it in low. And not that it did work in the end. That wasn't any more effective because he didn't score from it. But at least he saw it and at least he tried it. Because Liel Abad actually has scored a header this season and he's not bad for his size at that. But it's not what you want to play to, especially with such a crowded penalty box and a crowded 18-yard box. So in that respect, and I must say that when they did get the set pieces, which was 16 corners, I think, I thought until Juranovic came on, I thought the deliveries were really, really poor. In the absence of David Turnbull, it was Abada taking the corners, and I thought they were really, really poor. Didn't really threaten at all in that respect until Juranovic came on and started delivering it a wee bit better.
Was there also too much of a reliance on the likes of McGregor and Rogic Allison to produce that Hollywood moment?
I think there is. I think you're looking to the same players all the time to find something and to come up with something. I think Jota and Kyogo have been the focal points up until now in the season. I think you go back again, another frustrating afternoon in the Dundee United game when Jota was the guy that looked as though he was maybe going to pull them out of it. I think they hit the crossbar and the post about 3 times in that game. But I think there are certain players that Celtic need to bring in. I think you have to identify at the minute there are certain players that you need because you have got too much of the same. Yeah.
Sean, you said last night in your match ratings that I think 6 was the highest you awarded.
Yep.
The rest were 5s. You said you found it hard to justify 4s because that's an absolute nightmare. You're saying that if you give someone a 4, but I think you could have been justified with a couple of 4s last night.
Potentially, but I think for me a 4 would denote an absolute shocker of a game, and on an individual basis. I mean, overall, you could argue the game as a whole was a shocker, but no, individually, I didn't think anybody had an absolute shocker. I thought a 5 was probably, which is a poor mark. You've got to remember, I thought a 5 was probably accurate for most of them. I gave the defence pretty much 6s because, well, they had nothing to deal with and they did deal with what they were asked to deal with. So, but again, a 6 is kind of like what you start with in the match ratings for me. So it was neither up nor down. So I thought the 5s were a poor mark, and I couldn't justify giving anybody that was on in an attacking sense anything better than that.
Did they trust the process, Alison, last night, or did they just go off the boil? Was it just a bad day at the office?
I think they got frustrated. I think they ran out of ideas. I think there was a lack of creativity. I think there was a lack of penetration. I think a lack of intent when they were in good areas. I thought they reverted too much to safe passes in and around the box, side to side, a lot of the time. I think they were bereft of ideas as the game went on, and it wasn't working. I think St Mirren were fairly resolute, which you would applaud them for given their circumstances. I thought it was a very plucky display, if you want to call it that. But I think Celtic should have had more about them. I think you have to be bolder at times with the ball. I think sometimes you maybe have to try something a bit different when it's not working.
You can't keep winning goals by a single goal margin, Sean, can you? There are times when you luck out and you don't get that breakthrough. You know, I'm thinking of like Aberdeen, they beat them 2-1, Motherwell 1-0, Ross County 2-1. You know, that it was that kind of sequence that you knew would probably come to an end at some point when you when you don't get that breakthrough goal?
Eventually, the coin flips the other way. I mean, that's always going to happen. But as I said last week to use the 16 at that point, it was, I think, match run of 1 defeat and 1 draw, and then the rest wins, 14 wins. It was like 8 or 9 of those games were decided by 1 goal.
Yeah.
So I think it was 9 games by 1 goal. Celtic had won 8 of them. So I don't think that is a coincidence. I think that does speak to a mental fortitude in the team. It wasn't there last night. The coin flip didn't fall in their direction. I do think that ultimately, as I said at the start of the show, I do think that you do need to look at Celtic's performance as well as St Mirren played, and their inability to break through those lines, play more adventurous passes, and ultimately rely on a crossing strategy that just wasn't working.
So I'll get back to my question, my couple of questions ago then, Alison. On Sunday, they're going to come up against the same thing, aren't they?
Yeah, I think you're facing a slightly different team in that St Johnstone are a team in freefall at the minute. I think they look like a team bereft of any belief and confidence at the minute. I think St Mirren in some way were maybe galvanised by the circumstances and feeling hard done by it, having to actually play the game last night. I think they had a cause to buy into, maybe a sense of grievance, and you would say that they still had their own first team recognised backline in there with everyone else keeping their shape in front of it and their discipline. St Johnstone, I think, will look to emulate that type of performance. It will be tight again. What I would say is that I think it's given Celtic probably a bit of a jolt. You know, I think they have been getting over the line in games, just over the line. So I think it will be a case of analysing it. I wouldn't be surprised to see Kyogo brought back in for it in some capacity, even if it is only for the last half an hour to come off, or maybe he starts a game and gets an hour. I was surprised that he didn't even feature on the bench last night, given the fact that he played so long in the cup final. I thought he would have had some part to play, so I don't know if there's been a reaction to the hamstring or not, and they're just unwilling to force the issue in case it actually aggravates it. Obviously trying to manage it. The manager would only say afterwards he's managing them through the games and through the injury. But I think, again, the onus is now on Celtic to go and produce a performance. They do have players there that should be capable of getting the win. I think you look at the resources of both clubs, you look at the quality, the international players that Celtic have, and they should have enough to go and get a result. What you would say is that playing without a natural striker these last few weeks has been damaging.
Yeah. Now, the one positive that did come out yesterday, Sean, was that the winter break was moved. We'd spoken about it earlier in the week. Was that a surprise to you, or do you think common sense prevailed?
Both came through. I still think common sense prevailed, but I do think it was a bit of a surprise. I had resigned myself to it not happening. I think I'm still a bit. I know they went for the kind of middle of the road compromise of still playing the Boxing Day games. I still don't really see the logic in that either. But that is the way that they've done it. At least there's some semblance of common sense with bringing it forward. And as I said in my comment piece on the site, which is still on the site before, from before they announced it, to me, it's about giving fans and clubs a chance. Not necessarily that I'm saying it will only be 3 weeks. It might be longer. Everybody kind of presumes it is going to be longer. And if at some point, then you do need to play the games with either skeleton crews or behind closed doors, then fair enough. But for me, it was always about giving clubs and fans a chance by moving it forward and just picking it up after the winter break. And if it turns out that you can't, then you can't. But at least give them a fighting chance rather than just resigning yourself from the get-go.
You feel the same way, Alison?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's common sense. I really do. I think it's an entirely different proposition to play a game in front of a full stadium as it is to play, with 500. It's not even 500 supporters. It's 500 people in total within the stadium. So that includes broadcasters and media people and teams, etc. So it's not even 500. I think it's a completely different occasion. I think for so many reasons, I think you want to get to a point where you're playing in front of capacity crowds where it's safe to do so. I think it compromises the game hugely when you don't have that. And I also think even just from financial points of view, for clubs, the hospitality revenue and revenue from ticket sales can be so important. So I think you've got to give it every possible chance to get there again.
You've got to remember as well, Tony, that see the rescheduled games, specifically obviously the Glasgow Derby, there's internationals run about then, which, I mean, as much as it might hinder Celtic, the common sense solution Celtic put forward, they still, to be fair to the club, they still advocated for that common sense solution, which I think is admirable, actually, because they know that there's a chance that when that game now is rescheduled for the start of February, that they might be without Kyogo and Tom Rogic if they're called up for their international squads. But
it's a bit of ambiguity about Kyogo, I think, just because I think the Japanese manager had said he was going to take in some homegrown players, but I'm not sure if that would also encompass that gig. There's 2 games.
There's 3 games. The first game is with, as far as I can see from the Japanese football website, it was for the Uzbekistan friendly that he's going to take J-League players, and then for the 2 qualifiers it'll be a different squad after it. So I think that's January the 21st Uzbekistan game, and then it's 27th in the first, I think, for the other 2, which are qualifiers, which you would presume that Kyogo would be called up for, because that'll be a different squad.
Well, Celtic will deal with that when the time comes. Enough doom and gloom merchants there. So we'll end with a positive comment, from James Rees. Sorry guys, never read out more of the comments today. We usually do that, but James Rees said, "Let's not panic, guys. We will cut that gap." There's a nice positive one to end with, guys. It remains to be seen if Celtic can cut the gap, but as Alison alluded to earlier, they've just made the task slightly more difficult, but not insurmountable. Guys, thanks for your contribution. Always enjoy it. Thanks for the comments as well, guys. I'll get back to it when I'm fighting fit as well. 100%. I'll read more of them out. I'm away to get the results of my PCR test. Fingers crossed. Trips, and I'll speak to you soon. All the best.
Take care.
Cheers.